The morning fog hung heavy over Windsor Castle as Sergeant James Mitchell adjusted his ceremonial uniform for what he assumed would be another routine security sweep. 23 years of service to the Crown had taught him that palace life, despite its grandeur, often settled into predictable patterns. The Queen Consort's quarters required daily security checks, a responsibility he had carried out hundreds of times without incident. Mitchell possessed the weathered face of a man who had seen military service in 3 different conflicts before joining the Royal Protection Command. His colleagues respected his thoroughness, though some found his attention to detail excessive. Today, that very trait would change everything he thought he knew about the royal household. The Queen Consort had departed early for a charity engagement in Manchester, leaving her private wing temporarily unoccupied. Mitchell's assignment involved a comprehensive security sweep of her chambers, checking for any irregularities or potential threats. The protocol had been established decades earlier, following several security breaches that had shaken the monarchy's confidence in their protective measures. Walking through the ornate corridors lined with portraits of long-deceased monarchs, Mitchell carried his standard equipment: a digital scanner for electronic devices, a small toolkit for examining furniture and fixtures, and a detailed checklist that had been refined over years of security operations. The morning light filtered through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across Persian carpets that had adorned these halls for generations. The Queen Consort's private sitting room reflected her personal taste in a way that public spaces never could. Antique furniture mixed with contemporary pieces, creating an atmosphere that felt both regal and surprisingly intimate. Family photographs occupied places of honor on mahogany side tables, while fresh flowers from the castle gardens added life to the formal surroundings. Mitchell began his systematic examination with the same methodical approach he had perfected over 2 decades. Electronic sweeps revealed nothing unusual. Window latches functioned properly. The fireplace showed no signs of tampering. Everything appeared exactly as it should in the private quarters of a senior royal family member. However, something felt different this morning, though Mitchell couldn't initially identify the source of his unease. Years of security work had honed his instincts to detect subtle changes in familiar environments. The arrangement of furniture seemed slightly altered, not enough to suggest intrusion, but sufficient to catch his trained eye. Moving into the adjoining dressing room, Mitchell noticed several items of luggage stored along one wall. Travel cases of various sizes suggested recent or upcoming trips, a common sight given the Queen Consort's extensive schedule of official engagements. Most appeared standard, bearing the discreet monograms and quality construction expected of royal accessories. One particular trunk, however, commanded his attention. Unlike the modern suitcases surrounding it, this piece appeared genuinely antique. The leather showed signs of age and use, with brass fittings that had developed the patina of decades. What struck Mitchell as unusual was not the trunk itself, but its placement and apparent weight. Security protocols required him to examine all containers within the royal quarters, regardless of their apparent innocuity. The antique trunk sat slightly askew from the others, as if it had been moved recently but not returned to its original position with the care typically shown to valuable items in the royal household. Mitchell lifted the trunk experimentally and was surprised by its substantial weight. The contents seemed to shift slightly as he moved it, producing a sound that didn't match what he would expect from clothing or personal items. His training had taught him that unusual weight distribution often indicated hidden compartments or unexpected contents. The trunk bore no external identifying marks beyond some faded initials that appeared to predate the Queen Consort's ownership. The brass lock showed signs of regular use, with small scratches around the keyhole that suggested frequent opening and closing. Most intriguingly, the lock was currently unfastened, secured only by a simple leather strap. Following established protocol, Mitchell documented the trunk's position with his digital camera before proceeding with his examination. The images would become part of his daily security report, though he had no reason at this point to suspect they would later be scrutinized by investigators and royal officials. The first glimpse inside the trunk revealed layers of tissue paper, carefully arranged to protect whatever lay beneath. This attention to preservation suggested valuable or delicate contents, which would be consistent with personal items belonging to a member of the royal family. Mitchell began removing the protective layers with the care his training demanded. What emerged defied his expectations entirely. Beneath the tissue paper lay documents, photographs, and personal items that clearly predated the Queen Consort's marriage into the royal family. The papers appeared to be correspondence, some bearing letterheads from decades past. Photographs showed people Mitchell didn't recognize, captured in settings that seemed both intimate and historically significant. One particular bundle of letters caught his attention immediately. The stationery was expensive, bearing an embossed crest that Mitchell recognized from his extensive knowledge of royal heraldry. However, these letters were not addressed to the Queen Consort, but to someone whose name he had never encountered in any royal context. The dates on the postmarks suggested a correspondence spanning several years in the 1990s. As Mitchell carefully examined more contents, he realized he was looking at what appeared to be a comprehensive archive of someone's personal life. Birth certificates, school records, medical documents, and family photographs created a detailed portrait of an individual whose existence had never been publicly acknowledged in connection with the royal family. The photographs were particularly compelling. They showed a young woman bearing an unmistakable resemblance to members of the royal family, captured at various ages and in different settings. Some appeared to be formal portraits, while others captured candid moments that suggested intimate family connections. Mitchell's years of security training had prepared him for many scenarios, but discovering what appeared to be evidence of a previously unknown family member hidden in the Queen Consort's private quarters was not among them. The implications of his discovery began to dawn on him as he continued examining the trunk's contents. Medical records in the collection bore the names of prominent physicians who had served the royal family for generations. School documents referenced institutions known for educating aristocratic children. Every piece of evidence pointed towards someone who had been raised with all the privileges of royal birth, yet whose existence had been carefully concealed from public knowledge. The most disturbing element of the collection was a series of legal documents that appeared to outline financial arrangements spanning decades. Payment records, trust fund documentation, and what looked like confidentiality agreements painted a picture of systematic efforts to maintain someone's silence about their true identity and family connections. Mitchell realized he was holding evidence of what could be one of the most significant royal scandals in modern history. The careful preservation of these documents in the Queen Consort's personal possession suggested their importance to her, though the reasons remained unclear. Were these items being protected, or were they being hidden? His mind raced through the potential implications of his discovery. If these documents were authentic, they suggested the existence of a royal family member who had been deliberately excluded from public life and official recognition. The financial records implied ongoing efforts to maintain this concealment, raising questions about who was involved in the arrangement and why such extreme measures were necessary. The responsibility weighing on Mitchell's shoulders felt enormous. His duty to the crown demanded that he report his findings to his superiors, but he also understood that the information he had uncovered could potentially destabilize the monarchy itself. The trust placed in him by his position required absolute discretion, yet the magnitude of the discovery seemed to demand immediate action. As he continued examining the trunk's contents, Mitchell found additional layers of documentation that deepened the mystery. Travel records suggested the unknown individual had been relocated multiple times over the years, always to locations far from royal residences and media attention. Educational records showed attendance at exclusive institutions under what appeared to be assumed names. The pattern that emerged suggested a carefully orchestrated effort to provide someone with all the benefits of royal birth while ensuring they remained completely invisible to public scrutiny. The level of planning and resources required for such an arrangement indicated involvement at the highest levels of the royal household. Mitchell's discovery had transformed what began as a routine security check into a moment that would change everything he thought he knew about the family he had sworn to protect. The weight of the secret now resting in his hands felt heavier than the antique trunk that had contained it for so long. Mitchell's hands trembled slightly as he photographed each document with his secure camera, following protocols that now felt inadequate for the magnitude of what he was documenting. The Queen Consort's private chambers, once familiar territory, now felt charged with dangerous secrets that could reshape the entire royal family's future. The most compelling piece of evidence lay at the bottom of the trunk, a birth certificate bearing a date from 32 years ago. The document listed parents whose names Mitchell recognized from royal genealogy charts, but the child's name had never appeared in any official royal documentation he had encountered during his extensive security briefings. The birth took place at a private hospital in Scotland, the same facility where several other royal births had occurred during that period. Medical staff signatures on the document belonged to physicians who had served the royal family for decades, lending authenticity to what Mitchell was seeing. Every detail suggested this was not a forgery, but genuine documentation of a birth that had somehow been erased from official royal records. Accompanying the birth certificate were hospital records detailing the mother's condition during pregnancy and delivery. The medical notes, written in the clinical language typical of such documents, nevertheless revealed a story of secrecy and careful planning. References to special arrangements and discreet accommodation suggested the birth had been deliberately concealed from the beginning. Most intriguing were the signatures on various documents. Several bore the handwriting of senior royal family members, including individuals who were still alive and active in royal duties. These signatures appeared on legal documents establishing trust funds, educational arrangements, and what appeared to be ongoing financial support for the child whose existence had been hidden. The financial documentation painted a picture of extraordinary generosity. Monthly payments had been made consistently for over 3 decades, amounts substantial enough to ensure a comfortable lifestyle but structured in ways that obscured their royal origin. The money had been channeled through multiple accounts and legal entities, creating a complex web designed to prevent anyone from tracing the payments back to their source. Mitchell discovered correspondence between lawyers, financial advisors, and what appeared to be caregivers responsible for the child's upbringing. The letters revealed a carefully orchestrated plan to provide education, healthcare, and social opportunities while maintaining absolute secrecy about the child's true parentage. Every aspect of the young person's life had been managed by adults committed to protecting the royal family's public image. The most heartbreaking elements of the collection were personal items that suggested a child growing up with questions about their identity. School reports showed academic excellence, but also behavioral issues that counselors attributed to family uncertainty and identity confusion. The young person had clearly struggled with not knowing their complete family history, yet had been given no answers to their questions. Photographs in the collection showed the child at various ages, always alone or with caregivers who were obviously not family members. There were no images of birthday parties with siblings, no casual family gatherings, no evidence of the warm family connections that other royal children enjoyed. The isolation was evident in every carefully composed picture. As Mitchell continued his examination, he found evidence that the secret had become increasingly difficult to maintain as the child grew older. Teenage diary entries, apparently confiscated and preserved, showed a young person desperately trying to understand why they were different from their peers, why certain topics were forbidden, and why they were never allowed to meet extended family members who allegedly existed. The diary entries broke Mitchell's heart. The teenager had written extensively about feeling like a ghost in my own life and wondering whether their parents were ashamed of them. References to being moved frequently, always with explanations that never quite made sense, showed a young person whose entire existence had been shaped by other people's secrets. Educational records revealed frequent school changes, always explained as opportunities for better programs or specialized attention. However, the pattern suggested something more troubling, a systematic effort to prevent the young person from forming lasting friendships or relationships that might lead to unwanted questions about their background. The medical records in the collection were equally concerning. Regular psychological evaluations documented increasing anxiety and depression as the child grew older. Therapists' notes mentioned the patient's frustration with family secrets and their growing suspicion that important information was being withheld about their identity and background. Most disturbing were records suggesting the young person had begun investigating their own origins as they reached adulthood. Private investigator reports, apparently commissioned by the individual themselves, showed attempts to trace their birth records and family connections. These investigations had been systematically thwarted, with records being sealed or made inaccessible through legal channels. Mitchell found evidence that the royal family had been monitoring these investigation attempts. Internal memos between royal staff members discussed strategies for containing the situation and preventing unwanted revelations. The tone of these communications suggested growing concern about maintaining the secret as the individual became more determined to uncover the truth. The collection included recent photographs that showed the now adult child bearing an unmistakable resemblance to current senior royal family members. The facial features, bone structure, and even mannerisms captured in candid shots left no doubt about the family connection that had been so carefully concealed for decades. Legal documents in the trunk revealed ongoing negotiations about the individual's future. Lawyers representing various parties had been discussing increased financial support in exchange for continued silence about their client's identity. The amounts being offered suggested desperation on the part of those seeking to maintain the secret. Mitchell discovered correspondence indicating the individual had recently rejected these financial offers. Letters from their legal representative made it clear they were no longer interested in money, but were demanding recognition of their true identity and inclusion in family activities they had been denied their entire life. The rejection of financial incentives suggested the situation was escalating beyond the royal family's ability to control through traditional means. The most recent documents in the collection were even more alarming. They included communications between senior royal staff members discussing permanent solutions to what they termed the growing problem. The language was carefully coded, but Mitchell's military background helped him recognize discussions about eliminating threats to operational security. Photographs of the individual's current residence showed evidence of surveillance equipment. Professional quality images captured from multiple angles suggested a comprehensive monitoring operation designed to track their movements and activities. The level of surveillance indicated serious concern about what the individual might do with their knowledge of their true identity. Mitchell found records of attempts to isolate the individual from potential allies or supporters. Employment opportunities had been systematically undermined, social connections discouraged, and even romantic relationships disrupted through various means. The pattern suggested a deliberate campaign to keep the person vulnerable and dependent on royal goodwill. The emotional toll of this treatment was evident in recent personal correspondence the individual had written but, apparently, never sent. These letters, addressed to senior royal family members, expressed pain, anger, and determination to no longer accept their exclusion from the family they knew was theirs by birth. The tone had evolved from pleading to demanding to threatening. Most concerning were indications that the individual had begun reaching out to journalists and media organizations. Contact information for reporters known for investigating royal scandals appeared in their personal notes, along with draft outlines of the story they were prepared to tell if their demands for recognition were not met. Mitchell realized he was looking at evidence of a situation spiraling completely out of the royal family's control. The careful secrecy maintained for over 3 decades was crumbling as the hidden family member became increasingly determined to claim their rightful place in the royal family, regardless of the consequences to the monarchy's public image. The weight of this knowledge felt crushing as Mitchell continued documenting his discovery. He understood that his findings could trigger the biggest royal scandal in modern history, potentially destabilizing the monarchy at a time when public support was already fragile due to various controversies and changing social attitudes toward traditional institutions. Yet his duty as a royal protection officer demanded that he report potential threats to the royal family's security, and the documents he had discovered clearly indicated a situation that posed risks to multiple family members. The individual's growing desperation and rejection of financial incentives suggested they might take increasingly dramatic steps to force recognition of their identity. Mitchell's military training had taught him to analyze threats systematically, and every piece of evidence pointed toward an escalating crisis that could explode into public view at any moment. The royal family's attempts to manage the situation through secrecy and financial inducements were clearly failing, while their hidden family members' patience had reached its breaking point. As he carefully returned the documents to their original positions in the trunk, Mitchell understood that his discovery had placed him at the center of a royal crisis that could reshape the monarchy forever. The secret that had been carefully guarded for over 30 years was beginning to tear apart from internal pressure, and he might be the last person with the opportunity to prevent a complete catastrophe. The afternoon light had shifted dramatically by the time Mitchell completed his documentation of the trunk's contents, casting long shadows across the Queen Consort's chambers as he grappled with the most consequential decision of his career. The protocol manual he had memorized contained no guidance for discoveries that could potentially bring down the monarchy itself. Mitchell's secure phone buzzed with a message from his supervisor, Commander Harrison, requesting an update on the security sweep. The routine inquiry now felt loaded with implications as Mitchell stared at the device, knowing that his next communication could trigger a chain of events beyond anyone's control. His fingers hovered over the keypad as he considered the precise wording that would convey the urgency without revealing too much over potentially monitored channels. The response he sent was deliberately vague: significant security concern identified during sweep. Request immediate private meeting to discuss findings. Recommend highest level of discretion. The military precision of the language would signal to Harrison that this was not a routine matter while maintaining operational security until they could meet face to face. While waiting for Harrison's response, Mitchell found himself studying the royal portraits lining the corridor outside the Queen Consort's chambers with new understanding. The painted faces that had watched over these halls for generations now seemed to harbor secrets of their own. The careful way certain family members were included or excluded from group portraits took on new significance given what he had discovered hidden in the trunk. Harrison's reply came within minutes, requesting an immediate meeting in his private office away from the main security center where conversations might be overheard. The location choice confirmed that his supervisor recognized the sensitive nature of Mitchell's discovery, even without knowing the specific details. The commander's 30-year career in royal protection had apparently taught him to recognize when discretion was paramount. The walk to Harrison's office felt interminable as Mitchell carried his camera containing images that could rewrite royal history. Every staff member he passed seemed to study his expression, though he knew this was likely his imagination heightened by the weight of his discovery. The normal bustle of palace life continued around him, yet everything felt different now that he understood the secrets hidden within these walls. Commander Harrison was waiting behind his closed door when Mitchell arrived, his expression grave despite not yet knowing what had prompted this urgent meeting. The office, lined with commendations and photographs from decades of royal service, felt like a sanctuary where Mitchell could finally share the burden of what he had uncovered. "Before you begin," Harrison said quietly, "I need you to understand that certain discoveries require very careful handling. The royal family's security sometimes involves protecting them from information that could be damaging if mishandled. Are you prepared for that level of responsibility?" The warning was clear, but Mitchell's oath of service demanded honesty regardless of the consequences. He transferred the images from his camera to Harrison's secure computer system, watching his supervisor's face change as each photograph revealed another piece of the hidden story. The commander's military bearing remained intact, but Mitchell could see the growing tension in his posture as the full scope of the discovery became apparent. "Sweet Jesus," Harrison whispered after reviewing the birth certificate and related documentation. "How long have you known about this?" "I discovered it 3 hours ago during a routine security sweep," Mitchell replied. "I've documented everything exactly as I found it, following standard protocol for unusual discoveries during security operations." Harrison was quiet for several minutes as he studied the photographs, occasionally enlarging certain documents to examine signatures and official seals. His expertise in authenticating royal documents was legendary within the Protection Command, and Mitchell watched his face carefully for any sign that these might be elaborate forgeries designed to embarrass the royal family. "These appear genuine," Harrison finally said, his voice heavy with the implications. "The signatures, the official seals, the paper quality, everything suggests authenticity. Which means we're looking at evidence of a royal family member who has been completely erased from official records for over 30 years. The confirmation hit Mitchell like a physical blow, despite his growing certainty about the document's authenticity. Having his supervisor validate his assessment meant they were truly facing a crisis of unprecedented proportions. The careful stability that had defined his career in royal protection was crumbling around a secret that could destroy the monarchy's credibility. Harrison began making secure phone calls to individuals Mitchell didn't recognize, using coded language to request immediate meetings with senior palace officials. The conversations were brief and deliberately vague, but Mitchell could hear the urgency in his supervisor's voice as he tried to convey the gravity of the situation without revealing specifics over potentially monitored lines. "We need to brief the private secretary immediately," Harrison said after completing his calls. "Sir Edmund has dealt with sensitive royal matters for 40 years. If anyone can guide us through this crisis, it's him. But, Mitchell, from this moment forward, your discovery is classified at the highest possible level. Discussing it with anyone outside the authorized circle could constitute treason." The word treason hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Mitchell had served his country in various capacities for over 2 decades, But he had never before faced a situation where his loyalty to the crown might conflict with broader principles of truth and justice. The hidden family member whose existence he had uncovered had rights that seemed to be systematically violated, yet exposing their situation could damage the institution he had sworn to protect. Sir Edmund Hartwell arrived at the palace within hours of Harrison's call, his usual diplomatic composure strained by whatever preliminary briefing he had received. The private secretary's office had been cleared of all staff, with security measures activated that Mitchell had never seen implemented during his years of service. The level of precaution suggested they were treating this as a national security crisis. Sergeant Mitchell, Sir Edmund began after reviewing the photographic evidence, "You've uncovered something that could fundamentally alter the British monarchy. The individual documented in these files represents a threat to constitutional stability that goes far beyond normal royal scandals. We're potentially looking at questions of succession, legitimacy, and public confidence that could bring down the institution entirely." The private secretary's analysis was clinical, but Mitchell could hear the underlying panic in his carefully modulated voice. Sir Edmund had shepherded the royal family through various crises over the decades, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for evidence of a completely hidden family member who was apparently becoming increasingly unstable and demanding recognition. The financial records suggest this situation has been managed at the highest levels for over 3 decades, Sir Edmund continued. The payments, the legal arrangements, the systematic concealment, this required coordination between senior royal family members, government officials, and legal professionals. The number of people who would need to be involved makes this conspiracy almost impossible to believe, yet the evidence is undeniable. Mitchell found himself wondering how many other staff members had discovered pieces of this secret over the years. The trunk had been stored openly in the Queen Consort's chambers, suggesting either remarkable confidence that it would never be discovered or a deliberate decision to keep the evidence close where it could be monitored and controlled. "What's most concerning," Sir Edmund said, studying the more recent correspondence, "is the escalation in tone from the hidden family member. They've clearly moved beyond accepting financial incentives and are demanding public recognition. The rejection of what appear to be substantial monetary offers suggests they're prepared to go public regardless of the consequences to themselves or the royal family." The meeting continued deep into the evening as they analyzed every aspect of Mitchell's discovery. Legal experts arrived to examine the documentation, while security specialists assessed the potential threats posed by someone who possessed intimate knowledge of royal family secrets and was apparently becoming increasingly desperate for recognition. The consensus that emerged was chilling. They were facing an unprecedented crisis that could destroy public confidence in the monarchy if handled incorrectly. Yet the hidden family member's demands for recognition seemed reasonable from a human rights perspective, creating an impossible situation where protecting the institution meant continuing to violate an individual's fundamental rights to identity and family connection. "The timing couldn't be worse," one of the legal advisors noted. Public opinion polls show declining support for the monarchy among younger demographics. A revelation that the royal family has been systematically concealing a family member while providing them with substantial financial support could trigger calls for abolition of the entire system. Mitchell listened to the strategic discussions with growing unease as it became clear that protecting the monarchy's stability was being prioritized over addressing the legitimate grievances of the hidden family member. The individual whose existence he had uncovered was being treated as a problem to be managed rather than a person whose rights had been violated for over 30 years. The meeting concluded with assignments for various officials to investigate different aspects of the situation. Sir Edmund would brief selected senior royal family members about the discovery while trying to assess their knowledge of the situation. Legal experts would examine options for containing the potential damage. Security specialists would evaluate the threat level posed by the hidden family member's increasing desperation. Mitchell's role was defined as maintaining absolute silence while continuing his normal duties, but he was also assigned to monitor the Queen Consort's chambers for any changes that might indicate she was aware her secret had been discovered. The possibility that she might try to move or destroy evidence made ongoing surveillance crucial to their investigation. As the officials departed, Mitchell found himself alone with Commander Harrison in the empty office. The weight of their shared knowledge created a bond between them, but also isolation from everyone else in the palace who remained unaware of the crisis brewing beneath the surface of normal royal operations. "This is going to destroy lives," Mitchell said quietly. The hidden family member, the royal family, everyone involved in maintaining this secret for decades.
There's no way this ends well for anyone. Harrison nodded grimly. Sometimes protecting the crown requires impossible choices.
We've sworn an oath to serve regardless of personal feelings about the situations we encounter.
Our job now is to help manage this crisis in whatever way causes the least damage to constitutional stability.
The conversation felt hollow to Mitchell, who couldn't shake his sympathy for the individual whose entire life had been shaped by other people's political calculations. The documents he had discovered painted a picture of systematic psychological abuse disguised as protection, with a human being treated as a security risk rather than a family member deserving love and recognition. As he returned to his quarters that night, Mitchell understood that his discovery had changed everything about his service to the crown. The moral certainties that had guided his career were crumbling around a situation where duty and justice seemed to point in opposite directions, leaving him to navigate an impossible path between loyalty and conscience. The palace atmosphere grew increasingly tense over the following days as senior officials grappled with the implications of Mitchell's discovery. Meetings were held behind closed doors at all hours, with security measures that transformed normally accessible areas into restricted zones. The careful routine that had defined palace operations for decades was quietly being dismantled as administrators prepared for a potential crisis that could emerge at any moment. Mitchell found his normal duties almost impossible to concentrate on as he monitored the Queen Consort's chambers for any sign that she was aware her secret had been exposed. Every movement of furniture, every missing document, every deviation from her normal routine took on potentially enormous significance as investigators tried to understand how much she knew about their discovery. The Queen Consort herself appeared unchanged during her public engagements, maintaining the composed demeanor that had made her a respected figure in royal circles. However, Mitchell noticed subtle differences in her behavior within her private quarters. She spent longer periods examining her correspondence, seemed more careful about document storage, and had begun locking drawers that had previously been left accessible. Commander Harrison briefed Mitchell each morning on developments in the investigation, though the information was carefully filtered to maintain operational security. What emerged was a picture of a crisis that extended far beyond the hidden family member's personal situation. Government officials at the highest levels were being briefed on potential constitutional implications, while legal experts explored options for managing a revelation that could destabilize the entire monarchical system. The individual in question has retained legal counsel, Harrison informed him during one of their private meetings. A prominent human rights attorney with experience in international law and media relations. The choice of representation suggests they're preparing for a public confrontation rather than continued private negotiations. The news hit Mitchell like a physical blow. The hidden family member's decision to engage legal representation specializing in media relations meant they were likely preparing to go public with their story. The careful secrecy that had been maintained for over 3 decades was about to explode into international headlines that could destroy the monarchy's credibility. There's more, Harrison continued grimly. Intelligence sources indicate they've been meeting with investigative journalists from several major publications. The meetings appear to be preliminary discussions about publishing their story if their demands for recognition aren't met within a specified timeframe. Mitchell's mind raced through the potential consequences of such a revelation. Public exposure of a hidden royal family member would trigger investigations into every aspect of the monarchy's operations. Financial records, family relationships, government connections, and decades of carefully maintained privacy would all be subjected to scrutiny that could reveal additional secrets beyond this single case. The most disturbing aspect of the situation was the apparent timeline the hidden family member had established. According to intelligence reports, they had given the royal family 6 weeks to acknowledge their existence publicly and include them in official family activities. The ultimatum suggested someone who had reached the end of their patience with decades of promises and financial inducements. What happens if they go public? Mitchell asked, though he feared he already knew the answer. Constitutional crisis, Harrison replied without hesitation. Parliament would likely demand a full investigation into the royal family's finances and operations. The media attention would be unprecedented, and public confidence in the monarchy could collapse entirely. We're potentially looking at the end of the British royal system as we know it. The weight of this knowledge felt crushing as Mitchell continued his daily security duties while secretly monitoring for signs of escalation in the crisis. Every news report, every interaction between royal family members, every subtle change in palace operations could be connected to the growing threat posed by someone whose existence most staff members didn't even suspect. Sir Edmund Hartwell had begun conducting discreet interviews with longtime palace staff members, trying to identify who might have knowledge of the hidden family member's existence. The investigation revealed that the secret had been compartmentalized extremely carefully over the decades, with most people knowing only small pieces of the larger story. However, several senior staff members had apparently been aware of ongoing arrangements they hadn't fully understood. The Queen Consort's personal secretary, Mrs. Margaret Thornton, had been managing certain financial transactions and correspondence for years without being told their true purpose. Her records revealed regular payments to accounts she had been instructed to maintain without asking questions. The systematic nature of these arrangements suggested the secret had required ongoing administrative support at multiple levels. More troubling was the discovery that government officials had been involved in maintaining the concealment. Intelligence services had apparently monitored the hidden family members' activities for decades, ensuring they didn't develop relationships or connections that might lead to unwanted questions about their background. The level of surveillance suggested state resources were being used to protect the royal family's secret. Legal experts briefing the investigation team revealed that the situation violated numerous laws regarding children's rights, financial disclosure, and government transparency. The systematic concealment of a family member's existence, combined with the surveillance and manipulation of their personal relationships, constituted serious crimes that could result in prosecutions at the highest levels of government and the royal household. The legal exposure is extraordinary, one constitutional lawyer explained during a briefing Mitchell was permitted to attend. We're looking at potential charges ranging from fraud and conspiracy to human rights violations that could extend to international courts. The number of laws that have been broken to maintain this secret could result in prosecutions that would devastate the royal family and government officials. Yet the political implications of prosecution were equally devastating. Charging senior royal family members with crimes related to concealing a family member would trigger a constitutional crisis that could lead to abolition of the monarchy. The government faced an impossible choice between enforcing the law and preserving institutional stability. Mitchell learned that the hidden family member had been born during a period of particular sensitivity for the royal family. Public scandals involving other family members had already damaged the monarchy's reputation, making the revelation of another potential embarrassment unacceptable to those managing the family's public image. The decision to conceal the birth had apparently been made at the highest levels of the royal household and government. The individual's mother had reportedly agreed to the concealment in exchange for financial security and protection from media attention that had been destroying other royal family members' lives during that period. However, the arrangement had apparently been presented as temporary, with promises that the child would eventually be acknowledged once public attention subsided. Those promises had never been fulfilled, creating the current crisis as the now adult child demanded recognition that had been denied for over 30 years. Recent surveillance reports painted a picture of someone who had finally decided to take control of their own narrative. The hidden family member had been systematically gathering evidence of their treatment, documenting the surveillance they had endured, and preparing a comprehensive case for public release. Their legal team was apparently assembling materials that would expose not just their own situation, but the entire system of concealment and control that had shaped their life. They have photographs, Harrison revealed during one particularly grim briefing. Surveillance equipment they discovered around their residence, documentation of employment opportunities that were mysteriously withdrawn, evidence of relationships that were disrupted through interference. They've been building a case that shows systematic violation of their rights spanning decades. The revelation that the hidden family member had been aware of the surveillance and manipulation added another layer of complexity to the crisis. Their evidence could expose intelligence operations that extended far beyond royal family protection, potentially revealing government surveillance techniques and resources that were never supposed to be acknowledged publicly. Most concerning was intelligence suggesting the individual had been approached by foreign media organizations interested in their story. International publications with no loyalty to the British royal system would have no incentive to suppress revelations that could damage the monarchy.
The potential for foreign exploitation of British royal secrets added national security dimensions to what was already an unprecedented crisis. Mitchell found himself wondering about the psychological impact of living under such systematic control and deception for over 3 decades. The hidden family member had apparently grown up knowing they were different but being denied explanations for their isolation. The discovery that their entire life had been shaped by other people's political calculations must have been devastating beyond imagination. The most recent intelligence reports suggested the individual was no longer responding to attempts at communication from royal representatives. Efforts to schedule meetings had been rejected, while financial offers were returned unopened. The pattern suggested someone who had moved beyond negotiation to a determination to expose the truth regardless of consequences to themselves or the royal family. "They've stopped taking our calls," Sir Edmund reported with visible frustration. "Their legal team responds only to confirm receipt of our communications, but makes no substantive replies. We're essentially dealing with someone who has decided that public revelation is their only remaining option for achieving recognition." The timeline established by the hidden family member was rapidly approaching its deadline. Intelligence sources suggested that publication of their story had been scheduled for release if no positive response was received to their demands for recognition. The date would coincide with a major royal celebration, ensuring maximum media attention and public impact. Palace officials had begun preparing for multiple scenarios, from attempting to discredit the individual's claims to trying to minimize damage through controlled revelation of selective information. However, every strategy carried enormous risks that could backfire catastrophically if not executed perfectly. Mitchell realized he was witnessing the final collapse of a secret that had required extraordinary resources and coordination to maintain. The hidden family member's determination to claim their rightful identity was about to collide with institutional forces that had spent decades ensuring their invisibility, creating a confrontation that could reshape British society itself. The final week before the hidden family member's deadline arrived with an atmosphere of barely controlled panic throughout the palace. Senior officials moved through corridors with the grim expressions of people preparing for a disaster they couldn't prevent, while normal palace operations continued with an artificial normalcy that fooled no one who understood the gravity of the approaching crisis. Mitchell received word through Commander Harrison that the Queen Consort had requested a private meeting with Sir Edmund Hartwell, suggesting she might finally be ready to discuss her knowledge of the situation. The meeting, scheduled for her private chambers where Mitchell had made his discovery, carried the potential to either resolve the crisis or confirm that it was beyond any possibility of containment. The surveillance equipment monitoring the Queen Consort's chambers had been upgraded to capture every detail of her meeting with Sir Edmund. Mitchell found himself assigned to monitor the audio feeds, making him a direct witness to conversations that would determine the future of the British monarchy. The responsibility felt overwhelming as he prepared to listen to discussions that could rewrite history. Sir Edmund arrived at the appointed time with the bearing of someone preparing for the most difficult conversation of his distinguished career. The Queen Consort received him in her private sitting room, the same space where Mitchell had discovered the trunk containing decades of carefully preserved secrets. The irony of the location was not lost on anyone involved in the investigation. "I assume you're here about Alexander," the Queen Consort said without preamble, her voice carrying a weariness that spoke of years spent maintaining an impossible secret. The use of the name Alexander sent shockwaves through the monitoring team who had been referring to the hidden family member only as the individual throughout their investigation. Sir Edmund's voice was carefully controlled as he responded. "Your Majesty, we become aware of certain documents and evidence that suggest a situation of extraordinary complexity. We hoped you might help us understand the historical context and current implications." The Queen Consort was quiet for several long moments before speaking again. "Alexander is my stepson," she said simply, the words carrying the weight of a truth that had been suppressed for over 3 decades. "Born before my marriage to his father, raised in secrecy to protect the monarchy from another scandal that could have been devastating given the political climate at the time." Mitchell felt his world shift as the Queen Consort's admission confirmed their worst fears about the scope of the conspiracy. The hidden family member, Alexander, was not just connected to the royal family, but was the direct offspring of a current senior royal family member. The implications for succession, legitimacy, and public confidence were staggering. The decision was made at the highest levels, the Queen Consort continued.
The child would be provided for financially and educationally, but kept completely separate from royal life to prevent any questions about legitimacy or succession that could destabilize the monarchy during a particularly vulnerable period. Sir Edmund's questions revealed the systematic nature of the concealment. Multiple government departments had been involved in creating false identities, suppressing birth records, and monitoring Alexander's activities throughout his life. The resources committed to maintaining the secret had been enormous, involving intelligence services, legal professionals, and financial institutions in a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of British society. Was he ever supposed to be acknowledged? Sir Edmund asked, his voice heavy with the moral implications of what they were discussing. Eventually, the Queen Consort replied, though her tone suggested she had never believed that acknowledgement would actually occur. The plan was always to introduce him gradually once public attention had moved on to other matters. But there never seemed to be a right time, and, as years passed, the secret became harder to reveal than to maintain. The conversation revealed that Alexander had been raised by carefully selected guardians who were unaware of his true identity. Even they had been given cover stories about his background, creating layers of deception that protected the secret even from those directly responsible for his care. The isolation had been complete, designed to prevent anyone from piecing together the truth about his royal parentage. Mitchell learned that Alexander had begun questioning his origins as a teenager, prompting increased surveillance and more elaborate efforts to prevent him from investigating his background. Educational opportunities had been carefully managed to prevent him from developing skills that might aid in uncovering the truth about his identity. Romantic relationships had been monitored and sometimes disrupted to prevent him from forming connections that might lead to unwanted discoveries. The psychological evaluations became concerning about 10 years ago, the Queen Consort admitted. Alexander was showing signs of severe depression and anxiety related to his uncertain identity. There were discussions about bringing him into the family circle, but, by then, the political considerations had become even more complex. The revelation that the royal family had been aware of Alexander's psychological suffering while continuing to deny him recognition was particularly damning. Medical professionals treating him had apparently recommended family therapy and resolution of identity issues, but these recommendations had been ignored in favor of maintaining institutional secrecy. Sir Edmund's questions revealed that recent events had been triggered by Alexander's inheritance of property from one of his guardians. While examining legal documents related to the inheritance, he had discovered inconsistencies that led to his investigation of his own origins. The discovery of his true parentage had prompted his current demands for recognition and his threats to go public if denied. His legal team has been very clear about their intentions, the Queen Consort said with obvious distress. They have documentation spanning decades that shows systematic violation of his rights. They're prepared to file suit in international courts if necessary to force acknowledgement of his identity and status. The international legal implications were staggering. European human rights courts had jurisdiction over cases involving systematic denial of family relationships and identity. A successful case could result in legal precedents that would force fundamental changes in how the British monarchy operated, potentially ending the tradition of managing family scandals through secrecy and financial arrangements. Mitchell learned that Alexander's legal team had been particularly strategic in their approach. Rather than seeking immediate financial compensation, they were demanding recognition that would establish legal precedents for other cases involving concealed royal family members. The implications suggested there might be additional hidden individuals whose existence had been similarly suppressed over the decades. Are there others? Sir Edmund asked directly, voicing the question that had been haunting the investigation team since Mitchell's initial discovery. The Queen Consort's silence stretched long enough to provide its own answer. Finally, she spoke with obvious reluctance. Alexander's situation is not unique. The pressures on the royal family during various periods have sometimes required difficult decisions about how to handle complications. The admission that Alexander was not an isolated case transformed the crisis from a single family scandal into evidence of systematic practices that could span generations. The potential for multiple hidden family members to emerge, each with their own grievances and evidence of mistreatment, created the possibility of revelations that could completely destroy public confidence in the monarchy. Sir Edmund's final questions focused on the immediate timeline and potential for negotiated resolution. The Queen Consort revealed that Alexander had rejected all recent attempts at communication, having apparently decided that private negotiation had failed after decades of broken promises. His legal team was proceeding with plans for public revelation regardless of any last-minute offers from the royal family.
He scheduled interviews with 3 major international news organizations, she said with resignation evident in her voice. The first publication is set for this Sunday, timed to coincide with the anniversary of his birth. His legal team believes the symbolic timing will maximize public impact and media attention. The conversation concluded with the Queen Consort expressing regret about the decisions made decades earlier, while acknowledging that the current crisis was largely the inevitable result of choices that had seemed reasonable at the time. Her obvious distress provided no comfort to the investigation team, who understood that regret would not prevent the impending catastrophe. Mitchell found himself profoundly shaken by what he had witnessed. The casual discussion of systematic human rights violations, the institutional prioritization of secrecy over individual welfare, and the apparent existence of multiple hidden family members painted a picture of an organization that had lost any moral foundation in its pursuit of self-preservation. The final preparations began immediately following the Queen Consort's admission. Legal teams prepared for litigation that could extend for years and reshape constitutional law. Public relations experts developed strategies for managing revelations that would dominate international headlines. Security specialists assessed threats that could emerge from public anger about decades of deception and abuse. Yet Mitchell understood that no amount of preparation could adequately address the scope of what was about to be revealed. Alexander's story would trigger investigations into every aspect of royal family operations, government complicity in human rights violations, and the use of public resources to maintain private secrets. The revelations would cascade through British society, challenging fundamental assumptions about institutional integrity and accountability. As Sunday approached, Mitchell realized that his discovery of the trunk in the Queen Consort's chambers had initiated the final collapse of secrets that had shaped the modern British monarchy for decades. The individual whose existence had been systematically denied was about to reclaim their identity in a way that would transform not just their own life, but the entire institution that had spent 30 years trying to pretend they didn't exist. The palace prepared for a storm that would test whether the monarchy could survive the revelation of its darkest secrets, while Alexander prepared to tell the world about a lifetime of systematic denial that had finally driven him to choose truth over the comfortable lies that had protected everyone except himself. The collision between institutional preservation and individual rights was about to create a constitutional crisis that would define the future of the British royal system for generations to come.